We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
What's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Do you not understand that they are that way because you're Joe Flacco?
And you just like to discredit things that people deserve credit for.
That you can't possibly be expected to defend that.
Talk about the game, Sam.
So,
who cares about what people think about us?
Yeah, I like football season and all the things that go with
it. Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo here with Sam Monson. What are you laughing at, man?
Whatever that sentence you were saying was about to become.
Started
with Skip Bayless.
He was
intrigued.
I got a message from a friend today. Skip Bayless was dropped my name on whatever show they're on.
Yeah.
And arguing with our friend Shannon.
Nick Wright dropped my name yesterday. My neighbor texted it to me. And then Nick Wright DM'd me today and said, also, I called you out by name on TV yesterday, blaming you personally for PFF having Mahomes with a worse grade than Mac Jones. But I was clearly joking, even though I do blame you.
Oh, man. It's too bad Mahomes didn't play better this year. Production was still there.
Well, that's what I told him. I tell him we'd grade Mahomes better the second he stops pitching the ball to cornerbacks.
Yes, exactly. And getting away with it right now. It's, well, welcome into the show. We're live on YouTube. It's our midweek show. It's a little more freestyle here. We can just ramble about.
More freestyle.
Yeah. It was just, we could really relate to the people how we're getting name dropped in on TV and all that stuff. Very
You've
relatable.
All been there.
Yeah, very relatable to the listeners here. Anyway, today we got to talk about all the madness around the NFL, the coaching carousel, the what did you want to call it? What did we name it? The autopsies.
Somebody emailed us in. You can email us too. NFL podcast singular at pff.com. We get all the emails. Google tries to intercept a bunch of them and calls them spam, and then I have to go in and okay them and say, no, this actually is a real email from a human, not a bot.
It was a good one.
That being said, there have been some bot emails in there as well, so I appreciate Google's hustle. But somebody emailed us and said that, a few years ago we did autopsies on the teams that didn't make the playoffs.
Yeah.
And they liked that, and they wanted us to do it again. I think we could do it certainly this week on the coaching.
All 7?
Yeah, the guys that got fired.
Oh, the guys that got fired. It's
the
really
autopsies,
6.
What went wrong, cause of death, that kind of thing.
All right. Okay, we could do a quick run through. I can't wait for my Fixing Every Team in 5 Minutes, our show, Fixing Every Team in 5 Minutes.
Yeah.
That series was outstanding last year.
What was our average time-wise for the
25 to 30 per team.
Yeah.
Yeah. The goal was 5 minutes, and in the first show we screwed it up. And we turned one show into 8 shows, 4 shows, whatever it was. And that's going to happen at some point again. So what's going on? I'm not going to stop the show just because you're coming in. We're professionals here. I can ignore this. I can ignore it, Tyler. I can ignore it. Anyway, let's get into you want to start with the autopsies? It'll be because some of them will I want to talk coaching, and there's front office overhauls too, because Joe Judge was just fired for the New York Giants. They're getting a full overhaul. Minnesota Vikings getting a full overhaul. Chicago Bears getting the full overhaul.
Dave Gettleman did the you're going to fire me? Sorry, I retire.
Yeah,
I'm walking off.
Smart.
Can't fire me. I quit.
That's what Renner should have done a couple of years ago when he got fired.
So
we let him back though.
Yeah, we can do that. What we already said, email us in, whatever you got. One guy sent us an email that I want to bring up top just because it's quick and we can answer it. We were trying to understand the ginger theory and how it applied to Week 18, right?
Yeah.
Where did it go? Where did all the ginger talent go? And for the people unfamiliar, for new listeners, somebody sent us a theory a while ago that there is only so much ginger talent in the NFL, and it tends to be stolen by one person to the exclusion of everybody else playing well. So, 2015 Carson Palmer could only happen because all of the other gingers at the time were terrible. That kind of thing. So this year, it's like, well, okay, Week 18, where did it go? Carson Wentz was disastrous. Andy Dalton played, but he didn't play well. Sam Darnold, same thing, right? He didn't play well. So who had it? We thought, maybe could it be Joe Burrow? But it turns out Burrow might not actually be ginger. He's just the gingerest looking non-ginger in the world. Plus, he didn't play. So even if he was hoarding it, it wouldn't have really explained it. So an email from Jay Wiley. I don't think I have his first name, but Jay Wiley points out Max Crosby is a ginger. Does he count, or is it just quarterbacks? Max Crosby would explain the whole thing because he's been on a tear all season long.
Yeah, so he's stealing it all from
so
from
that
all
explains
the QBs.
why Darnold, Dalton, and Wentz haven't been particularly good this year.
What was the final tally on his pressures? Because especially this weekend. Well, it's just this weekend.
11, I think he got this weekend.
We got 10 pressures and a 90 pass rush grade. So
yeah, he ended up with 101.
I'm sorry, no, 11. You're right, 11 pressures. Premium stats throwing me off because I was looking just at true pass sets.
Which is only the third time that somebody has topped 100 pressures in a season. Okay, it happened in Week 18, so Steve doesn't count it. But for the rest of us, 100-plus pressures in the season has happened, I think, 3 times before, and it's been Aaron Donald and J.J. Watt. So to put yourself on a list that involves those two and only those two, and now you, even with an extra game, is pretty impressive.
Are you saying is Max Crosby having a better season than, say, T.J. Watt?
I didn't say that, though he is on the first-team All-Pro and T.J. Watt isn't. So
we should say something nice about T.J. Watt just to balance things out.
He's been great.
He's awesome. Great player.
All 3 of those guys were incredible this season. Only 2 of them can make the first-team All-Pro. One has to miss out. And
all
just because one guy had tied the sack record doesn't mean that should get him there automatically.
It's extra feisty for us right now with Steeler Nation. Extra feisty lately.
Yeah, they're not happy.
They are not happy at all.
Out here
I
doxing
swear.
People.
I swear. That's messed up, man.
Yeah, it's pretty bad.
I'm ready for the next one. I opened up my I don't even want to talk about it. I opened up my DMs to try to give away. Remember, we gave away a bunch of elite subscriptions at the end of the year. I had to open my DMs so that I could do that. Mm-hmm. I opened up a whole new world of humanity that I didn't even know exist. Mm-hmm. And today I received a notebook, a ripped notebook sheet of paper with stats on it, calling us out for our takes with a stat breakdown. Some great stuff in my DM. I'm closing my DMs very, very soon. All right, before we get into these autopsies, do you want a chance to win the ultimate game day feast? Whether it's football success or financial savvy, winning starts with asking us questions. Would you like to know what it's like behind the scenes with Al on Sunday Night Football? Absolutely. Would you want to need to know in your financial future? Western and Southern's teaming up with PFF's Chris Collinsworth to share insights that will help you put you ahead on both your fantasy and financial scoreboards. Every submission earns you a chance to win the ultimate feast to celebrate football's favorite Sunday. This is why it's worth doing. We'll cover your catering up to $2,500, coordinate your order from a restaurant near you, and have it delivered on February 13th, 2022. Don't forget to check out the Chris Collinsworth podcast and Western and Southern's Instagram for answers to the best questions each week. So you can submit your questions at westernsouthern.com/askchris. One more time, it's westernsouthern.com/askchris. If you're watching on YouTube, check out the link. Remember, with Western and Southern, you can rest assured on game day. I suggest you check that out because I would love to have a $2,500 feast on Super Sunday. Am I allowed to say that? Is that blocked off too?
I don't know.
It's a Sunday of Super, February 13th. That's the day.
They can't have trademarked Super Sunday. Aside from anything else, Sky uses that
the
for
NFL. The NFL's trademarked everything, like the buffers. All right, who's been fired? Let's talk. Do you want to start with the Giants? What went wrong with the Giants? Dave Gettleman retired. Mm-hmm. Famous keyboard thing. And
taking his ring binders with him.
Yep. And Joe Judge is out. I love a good ring binder, by the way. Joe Judge is out. What went wrong in 2 years with the Giants? Joe Judge, Dave Gettleman.
Well, nothing got better. That was a pretty big problem.
Should we just? I mean, the offensive line was the biggest thing.
Yes.
Right. Like there were other moves that on paper seemed like they got better. I think their roster looked better this offseason. Didn't show up on the field, but the offensive line remained a disaster.
Is that the moves that made there were steps in the right direction. It's just that they were immediately followed by more steps in the wrong direction. They were the classic 1 step forward, 2 steps back kind of deal. Oh, your feisty defense? No, evaporated. The offensive line Andrew Thomas takes a step forward, everybody else falls to pieces. Like every time something got slightly better, everything else got worse, and the net was a massive loss. Like I'm not saying nothing ever got better for any period of time or in any denomination, but overall, there's no area where you can look at and say, all right, at the end of Joe Judge's tenure, this is a better situation than it was at the start of his tenure.
From a Gettleman standpoint, retired or not, you would have to say the Daniel Jones selection. I mean, that's the guy that he tied his future to, and we didn't get a definitive answer, whether it's because they didn't put him in the right position to succeed or not, but we didn't get a definitive answer that Daniel Jones is the guy. Yeah,
we flipped, right? When they drafted Daniel Jones, it was like, number 6 overall for a guy that's probably a high-end second-round talent at best. Feels rich. That's ballsy. You're putting yourself on the line there, and if it works out, great. If it doesn't, you're probably fired. And all of a sudden now we're a couple of years later, and everyone else is like, oh, Daniel Jones stinks. You're like, well, I mean, does he? Like, he's not been that bad in a really terrible situation. And all of a sudden, you take him out of the lineup, you put in Mike Glennon and, Jake Fromm, and had Brian Lewerke sitting there ready to take snaps, and it's a hell of a lot worse. So you definitely can't look at Daniel Jones' tenure and say, yeah, they nailed it. Perfect pick, franchise quarterback, we're moving forward. But equally, I don't think you can just say that guy's terrible. Like, he has played better, I think, than the situation should have allowed.
All that said, we'll spend plenty of time this offseason figuring out what the Giants should do. And I'm just, right now, I'm not in the boat that, okay, we need to tie ourselves to Daniel Jones, right? I mean, what you just described is somewhat easy to find around the NFL. Call him a starting caliber quarterback. He's probably a tier 4 quarterback, a low-end starter. There are plenty of low-end starters to go around. Let me ask you this. Is Daniel Jones better than Marcus Mariota? I'm going to use Mariota as a consistent baseline, I think, this entire offseason. Is Teddy Bridgewater, is Daniel Jones, is Sam Darnold going into last year? Are these guys better than Marcus Mariota?
Probably. I would certainly take the shot. Like, I would, if you were, somebody was sort of mentioning, all right, let's assume the Giants do want to get rid of Daniel Jones now. What are his options? Like, who are the suitors for Daniel Jones? And one team that came up as a team that might be intrigued by him was Pittsburgh, right? The post-Ben Roethlisberger era. They're clearly not going to hand the keys to Mason Rudolph going forward. It's unlikely to be Haskins either, based off zero evidence to suggest it should be. They could be a team interested in a guy like Daniel Jones. If you're Pittsburgh and your options are Marcus Mariota, Daniel Jones, I'd take Jones.
The intriguing thing about Pittsburgh is, let's say something nice about the Steelers, I think. They made the playoffs each of the last 2 years with not just subpar quarterback play, with this year, horrible quarterback play. Now, yeah, Big Ben, a couple times a year, game will make some great throws and this and that, right? I mean, seems to be at the right time and all that. But they've made the playoffs and found a way despite Big Ben. And would Daniel Jones be an upgrade? Almost certainly, sure. So maybe, I could see that. But if I'm taking over the Giants, there's no way I'm like, well, we got to do best by Daniel and, build around him. And you might have him as a lame duck one in his 4th year, not pick up that 5th-year option, let him roll. And I just don't think it's difficult to find a Daniel Jones caliber quarterback in today's NFL.
No, they're in a similar situation to the Dolphins with Tua, which is, I think he's shown enough to suggest that in a better situation, he might actually be a pretty good player. But equally, he hasn't shown enough that if you're a team looking to make radical changes, you are prevented from doing so by that guy being there, right? Like, if Daniel Jones should not be preventing you making a move like, oh, if you can get a Russell Wilson, yes. Hell yeah. If you stumble into an elite quarterback or a guy that you love in the draft, absolutely. Like, there's no move that you can make that you think will acquire you a franchise quarterback that should be blocked by having Daniel Jones there. But if that was like the end of his Giants career, if they stumble into a Russell Wilson or they made a move for a guy in a draft and Jones gets like stuck on the bench or kicked to the curb and cut and somebody else picks him up, I think you can realistically make an argument that he's been fairly well screwed there. And, that last year everybody was bending over backwards to make excuses about Sam Darnold, right? And it was all the Jets and, as soon as he goes to somewhere else, Carolina with Joe Brady and those receivers, the best situation he ever had, Darnold's going to be fixed. He's going to make you all look dumb, right? I thought that was ridiculous at the time. I think you can make a much better argument in those terms for Daniel Jones than you could for Sam Darnold.
Yeah, completely
I think
agree.
he's shown a lot more, and I think you can very firmly point to things that went to hell around him, and his play was affected because of it. If you were like, if Sam Darnold or if Daniel Jones ends up getting dumped, goes to somewhere that actually looks like a pretty good situation on paper, I think you can absolutely make the argument that people were trying to make for Darnold last year.
Yeah, completely agree with that. On the good side for the Giants, they've got 2 top 10 picks. On the bad side, 4th lowest effective cap space as of right now per over the cap. So I think it's an intriguing job. I do think they added more talent last offseason than what we saw on the field. Having Adoree Jackson plus James Bradbury at corner. Kadarius Toney looked like a future star when he was healthy and out there. And I know they didn't get much out of Kenny Golladay, but he's got a better track record than he showed. In the world of what went wrong here, Joe Judge speaking has to be a big part of that, right? Every time he spoke, and this seems to be a consistent theme the more we talk here, Sam, but this is what you described, Matt Nagy. This is starting to see it around the league. The more you hear from coaches, sometimes it's, alarming. And Joe Judge had some alarming things to say down the stretch.
Did you see the Matt Rule quote about why they picked up Sam Darnold's 5th-year option?
Yeah, they thought he'd be worth that, maybe. They thought it'd be cheap if he was good.
Now, yeah, that's what it kind of boiled down to, but it was said in a way that sounded way worse than that.
Yeah, I know.
It was sort of there was a lot of humming and hawing when they first asked the question, then the basically boiled down to, it seemed like a good idea at the time.
I think we overrate press conferences sometimes. Like Nick Sirianni kind of was nervous at his first press conference.
But there's a
he was
difference
saying
between
the right
nerves.
stuff.
Like that's something different, right? There are some people that are not great public speaking or talking in front of people, particularly when they're like first doing it. I think there's a very different thing between like, all right, that's the dude's first press conference as a head coach. He's never really been put in this situation. He's not comfortable in this spot. To a guy that's perfectly comfortable and is just spewing bullshit. Like that's way different. That's more problematic, where you get a guy who's doesn't have any issues with the situation. Like he's comfortable, hands in the pockets, looking cool, happy talking to these guys, and the words coming out of his mouth are just ridiculous. That, I think, is an issue. Matt Nagy, every time he opened his mouth, said something not just silly, but like this is making the situation worse every time you speak. How can you not see that coming? The Matt Rule thing, again, like how do you not have an answer for why you did that? Like, you know how the situation has gone. You've seen the season unfold. It's just a matter of time before somebody asks. Surely you have a prepared answer of like that. At least it might be crap, but there's you've thought about it and you've constructed like this is the party line. To just sort of go, I don't know, just it's bad. Joe Judge's problem seemed to me to be people are going to ask me questions. They're trying to get to something. I don't really want to answer it. I don't want to deal with it. So if I just talk for long enough,
If I just keep talking,
they'll go away. Like they'll get bored. They'll stop listening. They'll leave. And then I won't have to answer the question. If I just keep going for long enough, they will forget what they asked in the first place. They'll, you've been to press conferences. Like they're boring. You just you stop paying attention. You yawn. You stop. You're not there anymore, right? The problem is, particularly in New York, this is all on record. It's being filmed. People are dictating, like they're taking it down. It gets transcribed. People record the words you're saying, and you can't just use them to like distract people from the question that they asked in the first place. Because even if you were able to just like filibuster away, right? Like I'm going to read you whatever for the next 10 minutes and you'll forget what you asked me in the first place. Even if you were able to get away with that, they're taking it down in snippets, and they will just chop out a sentence from your filibuster and throw that out there as your answer, and you'll look like an idiot.
Yeah.
So that's not the way to go.
And you're not just getting questions about your, New Year's resolutions.
No,
or anything
not like Bill.
that. Bottom line with Joe Judge, I know he's coached special teams, he's coached offense and all that stuff. Nothing that he coached became special.
Special teams was bad.
Yeah, and if you're a former special teams coach like a John Harbaugh, what are you going to bring to the table? Well, you're going to bring overall leadership and direction and decision making or whatever it might be. So we didn't see anything there. The defense did show, they were pretty good under Patrick Graham at times, but nothing really got better.
He also has that. He also brought that idea of like, if you're going to be the hard ass, old school type of head coach, you need results. Like, you can't get away with that. You need buy-in the idea of like, oh, people are going to run laps as punishment, right? That is that's a high school level dinosaur type of mentality that might still function, but only if people buy in, right? It certainly is not going to function if everybody thinks it's crap and if you're losing games, right?
How much of that was legitimate fake news, though? I know there was some of it was real, but there was a pretty good fake Twitter account out there making up giant stories, and I don't know how much people ran with these fake stories, like Kelvin Benjamin stealing food from the cafeteria and stuff like that.
But even that speaks to the attitude people had on him. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if you're going to be Joe Judge, you're going to start like telling people to run laps as punishment. It's reached the point where it's its own punchline. People are going to make fun of it because it's ridiculous. So if you're going to do that, you need to have immediate success so that people buy in and people go, okay, yeah, like this is kind of old school. This is a weird way of doing it. We're not used to this. On the other hand, it's clearly having an obvious impact. So let's run with it. Like, that I think is where a lot of these Bill Belichick disciples go wrong, is that there's too much like Bill disciplinarian built in there without the credibility in the bank. Like, you're not going to buy it from Joe Judge or Matt Patricia or whoever. You buy it from Bill Belichick because the dude's been winning for decades.
Speaking of buy-in, how about having clean and shiny balls all year round here in 2022? A little New Year's resolution. Our sponsors at Manscaped are here to save your balls this year and make the ball drop into 2022 the cleanest and sexiest ever. Set your first New Year's resolution with good intentions and join the 4 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with our exclusive offer. Go to manscaped.com, use the code PFF for 20% off plus free shipping. Set your first New Year's resolution with good intentions and go do it. 20% off using the promo code PFF. It's new year, new me with the global leaders in male grooming. This year, take your grooming to the next level with the Performance Package 4.0 and the brand new Ultra Premium Body Wash. That needs no introduction. It solves all three for the perfect addition to your daily grooming routine, but it's in the shower. This body wash smells great too. It's cologne infused with aloe vera and sea salt to keep your skin feeling clean, nice, and moisturized. You said we don't want to bring all the people together and no New Year's resolutions ourselves. Like, everybody's on their own here.
You can have whatever New Year's resolution you want. I'm just saying, don't turn manscaping into a group activity.
It's not a group activity. But as our podcast listeners, hey, we're suggesting you go ahead and do that and take advantage of this offer. Get in on it together but separately. To complete the set, Manscaped threw in their Shed travel bag and anti-chafing boxer briefs as free gifts to keep all your goodies stored comfortably. I feel like this read gets better and better as it goes. Whether your resolution is to work out more or travel to new places, be sure to travel to manscapes.com for this exclusive offer. Get 20% off and free shipping. It's the code. The code is PFF. It's at manscapes.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscapes.com. Use the code PFF. It's new year, no pubes in 2022 with Manscaped. Another overhaul in the NFC North. We talked about this, broke this news on the big show on Monday, the review show. Bears complete overhaul, as well as the Minnesota Vikings. How about the Bears with Justin Fields? I'm intrigued here. It sounds like our guy Brad Spielberg, very plugged in to the Bears, says they're close as far as their general manager goes. Let me ask you this philosophically. Would you go GM first or coach first?
Just like in abstract terms?
In abstract terms, are you getting a GM who's going to approve your coach, or would you hire a coach that would approve your GM?
I don't see the purpose in having a GM if the coach doesn't report into him.
Yeah, because there are a lot of, so Seattle, it's like 50-50. It's an even split between Pete Carroll and John Schneider there.
Yeah, but
is that just, they earned that over time?
Right.
How do you get to that point? Because Pete Carroll he had not really had a ton of NFL. He had NFL success. He had 2 NFL head coaching jobs. Success at USC kind of earned his ability to be on the level with the GM. That's just one example.
Yeah, and I think they've sort of evolved into that working relationship. I'm not sure that would work as – you would need a weirdly hands-on owner who knows what he's doing, I think, to be able to handle, like, 2 guys that are separate but equal and nobody sitting above them. You know what I mean? Like, if you hire a guy, if you say, right, we have a vacancy for both. Now we're going to go get a head coach. We're going to go get a GM. We're not going to have that. We're not going to do it in concert. It's not going to be connected. We're just going to hire what we think is the best guy for each role. We don't care if they work together. They're going to have 50-50 responsibility, which means I'm going to need to be the adjudicator. Like, every time they disagree, it's going to have to come to me and I break the tie. There's not that many owners that A, should have that responsibility, and B, I would imagine want that responsibility. Like, those guys all own an NFL team because it's like the biggest tax break in the world, right? They don't want any part of this crap unless you're Jerry Jones and you're in it for like
some of them do.
Right, unless you're Jerry Jones and you're in it for like real life fantasy football, you don't give a crap, right? So you want no part of tie breaking every bickering argument that happens between the coach and the GM. So one of them has to run the show, and it makes sense to be the GM.
Yeah, one of the things, the more I've behind the scenes been working with folks that are, in the front office or have been in front offices or whatever it is the structure to the owner is just huge. It's massive. And I think we can lump the Miami situation with Brian Flores out here. We could kind of discuss all of this stuff. Flores gets fired after supposedly, what looked like on the surface 2 pretty good seasons, right? 2 winning seasons in Miami. They were in full rebuild mode. We spent our entire year of the 2019 talking about Miami tanking and Miami being in this, they've got 1 million draft picks. It's just complete rebuilds there. And it kind of happened quickly, right? They were on the verge of the playoffs, back-to-back seasons, doing great against New England. Brian Flores, the first maybe Belichick disciple to have that level of success, except maybe Bill O'Brien. Those are maybe the 2 guys that have had that level of success. And Flores gets fired. But a lot of it was because of structure and people him and Chris Greer apparently not getting along, the general manager. So the stuff that we don't see is obviously crucial. I assume most of our listeners work and have some sort of boss and structure and all that stuff. You know how much on a day-to-day basis communication matters, who you work with, how they work with you, how they deal with people and all that stuff. A lot of the stuff we don't see is a big part of this. But bottom line, I think the general manager should have a hand in the coach. But that structure needs to be laid out early. What does the communication look like? Who has the final say? And we've heard a ton of stuff with like general manager not even having the final say on who the 53 players on the roster are, the bottom part of the roster, whatever it might be. And that makes it really difficult to move forward as a franchise when you have that kind of disconnect.
So let's do the Dolphins autopsy then. Brian Flores, gone.
So Flores did a good job. I made the joke yesterday as Schefter was like, hey, he's going to be a hot commodity. I'm like, well, Miami could be a place, right? They need a coach. But clearly it just wasn't the right fit, right? Flores, I think, will be a fit somewhere because he did a good job with their defense. He was excellent when Matt Patricia left New England and Flores took over the defense. They didn't miss a beat. In fact, they got better. And people were saying, hey, maybe it was Flores that was really the driver here. And then he went to Miami and kind of did it again and did a nice job. So I think Flores will be coveted, but clearly it just did not mesh in Miami.
Yeah, and it is interesting, like all those kind of behind-the-scenes things about Flores and whether there's tension between him and not just Greer at GM, but offensive coaches and those kinds of things. Because he's a guy who, because he's got that defensive background and that's his specialty and that's where he's going to be, he needs to have a strong, smart offensive mind balancing that out, right? And they need to be able to work together and function in concert and all those kinds of things. So that might be his biggest obstacle right now is, can he hitch himself to that guy? Like the way Sean McVay kind of said, when you hire me, it's me and it's Wade Phillips, right? So if you have any concerns about my lack of defensive background or the fact that I'm 12 years old, I come with this grizzled old veteran who's been doing it for the last 50 years. You're good. You're fine. And I imagine that smoothed a lot of paths for him. And it didn't even need to be a long-term thing, right? Wade Phillips lasted a little bit and then bye-bye, we'll get somebody else in. And now we can cook. Because at that point, it's just the credibility, right? They just need to get in the door, and then you're away. Maybe that's what Brian Flores needs for that second gig, is to just attach himself to an offensive mind so that in the interview, he's like, you're not just bringing me in, you're bringing me, this offensive guy. We have a package together. It's going to be great. It's going to bring this team where it needs to go. And then, maybe Flores can get rid of him after a couple of years and do whatever he wants anyway.
So, and then when you talk that out, Sam, maybe Flores shouldn't be coveted. You know what I mean? Like maybe he just did a good job on the defensive side of the ball, and that was it. Because again, the head coaching job it's being a CEO. It's being able to manage all those pieces, manage all those parts. I do think we always talk about, do you hire an offensive guy, a defensive guy? The tricky part about being a defensive guy is if you hire the right offensive person, he'll be coveted, he'll be gone soon. How do you keep the revolving door of offensive coordinators, assuming you do well with it? How do you keep that strong? Whereas if you're not, like Sean McVay is always the offensive guy, right? He'll at least have this baseline of success, I think, with the Rams. His challenge will be finding defensive guys, but, predicting defense is harder overall than predicting offense. So, yeah, there's a lot to think about there, but clearly the co-offensive coordinator thing in Miami and the structure and all that stuff just was not working out there. And then I have no idea what the power struggle was as far as wanting to trade for Deshaun Watson versus buying into Tua, who wanted Tua initially, who was in on him, who was out on him. All that stuff behind the scenes is tough to really, really know.
It is, yeah. Ultimately, I think, as with all these things, you can only really judge them by the results. And the results for Flores have been pretty good, given where they were, given where they've been in terms of talent. The results have not been bad. And the defense, the stuff that he is going to have the most direct control over, has been the better part of the team. And when you say, all right, autopsy, cause of death, the single worst offensive line in the NFL by a country mile, and one of the worst we've ever seen in 15 years worth of doing this, right? And a quarterback drafted in the top 5, and the two guys either side of him, Joe Burrow, number 1 overall, Justin Herbert, number 6, those guys are both superstars. So the one guy you picked, and by you, I mean the Dolphins, not you, Flores. The one guy you got, it's not, again, Daniel Jones situation. He's not a write-off yet, but he's not what the other two are. Right. So it's already looking bad. The line is abysmal, so you can't even get a fair reflection on where Tua is right now. So just generally that side of things, which obviously is the most important thing in today's NFL, right? How is your quarterback? How's your passing game? Can you beat everybody else based off that alone? That is nowhere for Miami right now. And for a defensive-minded guy, that is a kind of tough spot to be in.
So cause of death is also Tua over Herbert, which mistake we would have made as well.
Yeah.
But also a big cause of death if you just picked the other quarterback, which I don't think was clear and obvious at the time. But if you had picked the other quarterback, perhaps you're not dead. Just saying. Let me circle back to the Bears here. I would say the cause of death here for the Bears, this is Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, is just the roster getting worse. I don't know if that's too broad, but I think the roster got worse. And there was a point in and then Nagy spoke too much, as you said.
Yes.
The more you got into his brain. But I do think there was a point where you'd say, man, Matt Nagy dragged Mitchell Trubisky, subpar quarterback play, to the playoffs 2 out of 3 years. Now, there's 2 ways of looking at that. PFF grades are the most independent evaluation of quarterbacks. They have less dependency on other stuff than any other number or stat. It doesn't mean that they're without dependency. If you do put a better supporting cast around quarterbacks, they will probably have a better chance to grade better. But you'll also see things like Matthew Stafford grading very similar year to year, like he did Detroit to the Rams, and his production numbers, all the peripheral numbers, getting better, right? So my point there is you could say Matt Nagy didn't actually develop Mitchell Trubisky and make him play well because there's like a part of that Nagy has a say in. But in 2018, they won the division. And I don't know if we just always overrate this one season, but they won the division. Was that because of Vic Fangio and that incredible defense that year? Was it just luck? But 2 out of 3 years with Mitch Trubisky as the starter, they went to the playoffs. And I don't think that I just think they got worse, though. I just think the roster continually got worse since 2018. So to me, it was more of a front office failure than a coaching failure, but clearly Nagy didn't do enough to overcome that and develop Justin Fields here in year one.
I think Nagy got lost. I think he started off very well, and he brought over that Kansas City offense that was doing well throughout the league at that point. Obviously in Kansas City, but then Doug Peterson in Philadelphia, Matt Nagy in Chicago. It was working. A lot of RPOs. They were doing a lot of things that were causing teams some problems. And then the team made that decision that Trubisky was the guy. Again, another decision that we would have screwed up as well, right? That year, Trubisky, Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, we had Trubisky as the top quarterback in that draft. And there's a little bit of revisionist history, I think, with Watson and Mahomes, but there were question marks about both guys, right? Mahomes, all right, all the stuff he's doing is magic and it's insane, but like, how does he work just in a normal offense? Nobody knows because he just didn't do it at Texas Tech. And we've seen this year that can go south, right? Spencer Rattler from Oklahoma was the same kind of thing, right? It's like that guy's not playing inside a structure at all. It's amazing. How does that function? And then next year you saw what happened when it didn't, the in-structure thing didn't happen and the out-of-structure stuff disappeared. And it's like, well, now you just suck and we're going to bench you and send you somewhere else. Anyway, gone. And then there were issues with Deshaun Watson's game as well. Anyway, the point is they made that call and Trubisky was bad. And not only was he bad, but then you're in this dilemma as a coach. All right, I have a quarterback that can't run 100%. He's struggling. I need to help him out. What do I do? So you start to modify your offense, right? You start to shape it in a different way and bend it and twist it and, maneuver it a little bit so that it fits better with the quarterback you have that's not playing up to his – you try and help him, right? And I think he ended up – what it did is it made the offense worse as well as the quarterback. So now you have a bad quarterback and the offense isn't doing what it used to, which has actually had the opposite effect of the one you wanted it to. And then once that ceased to become an issue, sort of, all right, we finally get rid of Trubisky, we bring in different quarterbacks. Now he'd like twisted and bent this offense so much that it was just this mangled husk in his hands and he couldn't piece it back together again. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think he just got lost and couldn't find his way back to the path once the reason for him getting lost was gone.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said there as far as Nagy in particular. I want to, just from a team-building effort, though, not only did like the Khalil Mack trade, I don't think – is the Khalil Mack trade a wash? If you look at the results of the Khalil Mack trade, it's a wash only from a results standpoint. It's a wash from the Raiders didn't capitalize on it.
Who saves it? If from a results standpoint, who did the Raiders get that saves it being a win for Chicago?
So
from a results standpoint,
I think you have to look at both. You have to look at both sides independently, right? And you could say that both sides lost, to be honest. So both sides lost the Khalil Mack trade.
Okay.
So for the Bears, they, as great as Khalil Mack is, they did not.
I'm gonna die again.
Saved it. They did not save the value of like the 3 to 4 players that they would have gotten, right? Khalil Mack did not overcome the value that they gave up. Now the Raiders, with the exact picks that they made in place of Khalil Mack, also just didn't capitalize on it. Like the process is a win for the Raiders. The result is a loss because they didn't pick players that were good. If they had picked 3 other first rounders at random that don't even make sense, they probably win the trade. That's my point here. So the Bears roster got worse because they got one elite player and created 2, 3, 4 more holes across the roster, and it got worse in 2019, in 20, in 21. So that's a big part of it too. Having 18 tight ends in the tight end room at all times was just ridiculous by the Bears. Paying Jimmy Graham and trading up to get Cole Kmet in the second round.
They made
all
some
that
mistakes.
I'm just saying there was a lot of team building issues with the Bears since 2018, where it was like, hey, there's a promising defense, and they created offense with Trubisky. Maybe there's something with this offensive play caller and this offensive system in Nagy. So as far as going forward, I think it'll be interesting because a lot of people around the NFL had Justin Fields as QB5 among all the first rounders. So who comes in? Are are they going to even look at people who don't love Justin Fields? There was a lot of people who were torn on him, just like people are torn on probably how much you would want to invest in Mac Jones because he didn't seem special, or how much you would want a Trey Lance or whoever. I don't know if enough people are sold on Justin Fields, and I think a lot of the concerns that people had about Justin Fields all showed up in his rookie season this year. And the excitement that people had about Justin Fields also showed up. So that, I don't know if that limits who they could potentially get from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah, it's also like who was in love with Justin Fields within that building, right? Because obviously Nagy last season, which is definitely contributed to, I think, him getting fired, was not in love with the idea of Justin Fields starting. Whether or not he liked him as a player or a prospect or a guy that could be the quarterback going forward, he did not want him on the field in year one, went out of his way to try and prevent that happening. And then when it did happen, when his hand was forced, and it's like, oh, we got to play Fields now, didn't do a whole lot to help him out, right? Like, I think some of it was overblown in terms of, oh, look at these ridiculous things they're asking him to do.
They didn't roll him out 20 straight times.
Yeah. But like later in the year, it's like you're not – where is the creativity here? There's almost nothing happening in this offense that plays to what Justin Fields does well. There's a whole bunch of stuff where you're just asking him to run the offense and then hoping his athleticism will get you out of any problems that are there, some of which are his own making. But, like, again, like, what are we doing to prop this guy up? This is part of why I think Nagy just got lost in the weeds and couldn't find his way back to, like, the proper playbook. But his attitude towards Fields, I don't think did him any favors. And then, as we said before, anytime he opened his mouth to talk about anything, he made things sound worse and look worse and worse.
And those things were like, hey, I took over the play calling this week when you scored 3.
Yeah.
Or, hey, I gave out, I let someone else call the plays this week when you scored 30 or whatever, whatever the breakdown was. I'm back to calling plays. You just didn't score again. Don't tell everybody. Don't admit it.
Immediately after, Justin Fields has a great game, and then you come out and you're like, we don't know who the quarterback is next week. Like,
yeah.
just don't say that. That's going to come up. Stop it.
And that's why, in all this hiring process, the most important thing for the Chicago Bears is Justin Fields and his development as of right now. Obviously, putting the supporting cast around him to succeed, but finding someone who's going to develop him and play to his skill set. So that's where the Bears need to go here. Before we get into the Vikings, don't forget the NFL.
What's your cause of death for the Bears regime? Mine was Matt Nagy getting lost and not being able to find his way back to his own playbook.
I just think talent acquisition.
So you think the cause of death for the Chicago regime was actually personnel mistakes? Personnel,
yes.
Wow.
Huh. Yeah. Because remember last year at this time, right after free agency?
Hang on. Is that personnel as in like if they'd gotten a good quarterback instead of Trubisky, or if they'd still taken Trubisky but like everything else?
Everything but the quarterback.
Okay.
I don't think they made – I mean, they missed on the quarterbacks too, right? They were doing everything they could to get Russ. They were doing everything they could to get a quarterback. Last year after free agency, let's not forget where we were here. The Bears, when you're just putting their depth chart up against everyone else, it looks terrible. And then they got the leftovers of free agency. They signed Andy Dalton. It was the most uninspiring offseason until they made a move to go get Justin Fields in the draft, which is fine. Like that's the right play. That is great.
And then declared that he wouldn't be the starter.
Yeah, and then however they handled that situation, forget it. But the foundation of the Bears roster had gotten worse every single season, much like in Seattle, just like what I keep saying about.
But you're
the Seahawks.
essentially saying that like if they'd maintained the kind of roster that they had before, Nagy would still be the coach.
I think Pace would be there. I think Pace. So like again, the Khalil Mack trade. It depends on how you view it. They got him, and in 2018, they had the best defense in the league. They won the division over the Packers, right? They went to the playoffs. You could say it was a win that year. Everybody's like, Khalil Mack trade, worth it, worth every penny. The Raiders have as many pressures as Khalil Mack. This is crazy. But you could also say that was the cause of death as well, because the rest of the roster, 3 players in the NFL can never be as valuable as one non-quarterback. It just can't happen. And the rest of the roster, you started to see that as the years went on. The Khalil Mack could not be worth 3 players on that team. And maybe that's the cause of death. But I think it's all this trickle down of personnel issues that screwed it up for both sides in the end.
Okay.
We'll get to the Vikings in a minute. The NFL playoffs are here. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. They're kicking things off with a huge offer. As we count down to Super Bowl 56, new customers can get That's right, 56-1 odds on any wildcard team to win their game. Bet just $5 and win $280 in free bets if your team's victorious. If Sportsbook isn't yet available in your state, you can still have something to play for this wildcard weekend. Everyone can play for huge cash prizes with DraftKings daily fantasy football contests. And DraftKings is giving all new customers a free shot at millions of dollars in total prizes with their first deposit. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PFF. You get 56-1 odds on any NFL team. Bet just $5 and win $280 in free bets if your team wins. It's promo code PFF this wildcard weekend at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Must be 21 or older. New Jersey, Indiana, Pennsylvania only. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit, $1 wager required, one per customer. Restrictions apply. See DraftKings.com/sportsbook for details. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. You're mocking my Bears autopsy.
I'm not mocking it. I don't think it's right.
The team got worse. Do we save the Vikings to the end? I feel like you can go for an hour on this.
You can put it wherever you want.
Cause of death: Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman.
Cause of death. I mean, they just they got stale. Isn't that what it is? Like, they're not bad. The Vikings aren't bad. They're middling, average, perpetually. And you have, the problem is you take an above-average GM, an above-average head coach, and an above-average, to maybe better than that, quarterback. And in an ideal world, just being above average at the three most important positions in the entire franchise would have some kind of compounding effect, and they would make each other better, and you'd be really good overall. But it didn't. It just created a slightly above average team that is now locked into that because those three guys are going to be there forever. So I think they just reached this point where it got stale and it needs to be refreshed. And by refreshed, I mean everyone needed to be fired.
There was a point where Mike Zimmer was doing a great job on the defensive side of the ball. So as we talk about Flores, right, and a defensive coach, what can a defensive coach do to succeed here? Keep that side of the ball afloat. And I think for the most part, the Vikings did a good job. Last, 3 years, it got much worse. Last year was bad. This year started off bad, got a little bit better. But there was a point where they had one of the better defenses in the league. This isn't exactly like the Bears situation, but the Vikings after 2017 and into 18, their nucleus and core was really, really good. But the NFL, it is just challenging to maintain success in the free agent era and all that fun stuff. And I just don't think they properly replenished on that side of the ball. And then from a quarterbacking standpoint, they tried to make moves, right? Teddy Bridgewater. They went from Teddy Bridgewater to desperation Sam Bradford for a year, to Case Keenum, where they had the most success, ironically, because I think it just meshed with the roster. And then they made the power move for Kirk Cousins. That was supposed to elevate them, and it didn't. And I think that's the most confusing part of the Vikings era, because Cousins on paper is better than what they had at quarterback. Better than Teddy Bridgewater, better than Sam Bradford, better than Case Keenum. And they got a little bit better, I think. And that's it. I mean, they didn't get back to the NFC Championship, but that 4 years was probably better than what they would have gotten out of any of those previous three in that particular situation. I mean, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah. You could make the argument that the cause of death was Kirk Cousins. It would be very harsh on Kirk Cousins because he personally he's overachieved, I think, relative to what expectations could or should have been given what we knew about him from his career before Minnesota. Washington Kirk Cousins has been dramatically outperformed by Minnesota Kirk Cousins. So from one point of view, you look at it and say, whatever they expected him to be, he's probably been better than that. And yet it still wasn't enough. Like that, I think, is the point, is that they committed this money to him. They did it in such a way that it was going to be stressing the salary cap all the way. You know, these fully guaranteed deals, short term, so that you sort of locked yourself into this cycle of them and keep re-upping him. And he's good. In fact, he's been very good, but he's not transcendent, and he's not elevating everybody around him to the point where it doesn't matter that you're no longer able to maintain the kind of roster that you had around him. And they've been unlucky in that time as well, right? Like Danielle Hunter's barely played the last couple of years. He's arguably their best defender. They've had these losses and injuries and things like that have definitely impacted them. But, you know, other teams have as well. The point being, Kirk Cousins might be great, but he's now becoming sort of emblematic of the contract you can't take on board, right? It's okay if you have Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen or a guy that can like carry the whole thing, you can pay him monster money. But if you don't have that guy, it almost doesn't matter how good the dude is. You can't pay him that kind of cash. And Kirk Cousins is like that dude. Maybe he's the new Matt Ryan inflection point. Like he's the guy where you can't hand the contract that he has to a player like that. It has to go to the Josh Allens or the Mahomes or the Aaron Rodgers of the world. And if you do give it to a Kirk Cousins, it almost seals your fate at that point because you just don't have the flexibility to maintain the kind of roster around him that he needs.
I would also say the Matt Ryan inflection point's a tough one too because me at PFF, Mr. Quantify everything in numbers, how much of the unquantifiable with Cousins is legit and is an issue? And we've talked about this a lot through the years and stuff, right? Changing the way you play the game down the stretch in a game, the Brady's and Mannings of the world would always do that. Trusting, even though Cousins has gotten better in all these things, I think. Leading a fourth quarter comeback, playing to the score, whatever it is. But with Matt Ryan, like Matt Ryan's first season, he had these clutch walk-off moments. Even when he wasn't playing his best football, he had that. And even, say, a Matthew Stafford, right? I saw a fair question posed the other day. Would you rather have a Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins, or a couple other names? And it's tough for me not to say Matthew Stafford, even with Kirk Cousins grading higher than Stafford over the last couple of years. Because maybe I'm buying into the moments and what a guy's capable of, but I still feel better about Matthew Stafford leading that fourth quarter comeback and carrying my team than I do a Kirk Cousins. Or at least being aggressive enough that I can hit this high-end potential that maybe Cousins doesn't bring to the table. It's tough to articulate. I'm struggling to articulate it right now because I think it's more than he's averaging $33 million per year. Because I think he's better. He's played better than the other guys that are making that kind of money. Jared Goff, Carson Wentz. Like Cousins has played better ball than both of those guys. Other than Wentz's, it's fluctuated a little bit, but over the course of time, Cousins has been better than those two guys. There were moments where Goff looked better. There were moments where Wentz looked better. Cousins looks better than those guys, but not as good as the guys like Dak, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, the other guys making that kind. Matt Ryan generally. But Matt Ryan's down at this point where I don't want to pay him that money. It's just tough to articulate. I think it's more than just here's over $30 million per year for the quarterback. We're hamstrung everywhere else. It's here's this $30 million. You're a good player, but there's not great in there. And that's a challenge.
Yeah, he doesn't have, everyone always talks about the intangibles and the leadership and the it factor, whatever that is, and all the things you can't really quantify. Whatever they are, he doesn't have them. Right.
The funny thing is,
it's universally accepted. Like the media doesn't really like him. His own teammates don't come out and rally, in his defense ever. Like he's not a guy that inspires people. He doesn't inspire.
The funny thing is, coming out of Michigan State, he had some of those like speeches, like because when you hear a college kid make a good speech, you're like, oh, this kid's got a bright future. This kid's good. And if you look at it at a high level and say, here's a 4th round pick that turned into Kirk Cousins. That's really
huge
incredible.
Success. And he's a good player. But the point is, the NFL has now become this world where you need great or you need cheap, right?
Yeah.
The middle ground is useless to you. So that's where the Vikings have been. They've been locked in this purgatory where they don't have great and they don't have cheap. So they're just stuck.
They're
stuck in the middle. That's the problem with that, is it's worse than being bad, right? At least being bad gives you an opportunity to hit the reset button and find good or cheap again. When you sign up to a guy that's neither, that is locked in that middle of, okay, he's good and expensive. Now, not only have you missed out on great or cheap, but you are locked in a world of like perpetual average where you can't get at either one of those things, right? It's very difficult to go from where they are right now to either great or cheap, right? You either need to strike absurdly lucky in the draft, right? Like Kellen Mond randomly becomes an all-pro, right? You'd have to get spectacularly lucky like that, or you need to do what they're doing, which is like, let's blow the hell out of the whole thing. Let's detonate this thing. Let's take a crappy year and let's reset that way. So I think that is the mistake, is a guy like Kirk Cousins is a really good player, very, very good. but that's no longer what you're looking for in the NFL. Like you can't say you're better off being bad at quarterback, but you know what I mean? Like being bad puts you on the path to being great in a way that being good doesn't. Like being good, you need to ride being good for long enough that you can get spectacularly lucky. Being bad, at least you get a chance to just bam, let's roll and try and get great again. No, didn't work. Bam, let's try it again. You know what I mean? You're on this really quick sort of 2-year cycle of let's take a shot at being great. And that's the thing you need to get to. The Vikings' problem is they signed Kirk Cousins. He's been really good, and that just doesn't do you anything anymore.
So final cause of death?
I think it's too harsh to say it's Kirk Cousins. I think everything just got stale. Like
same as the Bears, I think. They did not.
But I don't think they lost their way.
Roster.
Like Zimmer was still doing Zimmer things. Like that defense on third down was still nasty. They just didn't have the talent. Spielman was still making some good calls, right? They draft Justin Jefferson. Like they flipped Stephon Diggs for Justin Jefferson and got cheaper. That's an incredibly good move.
But that's another thing that doesn't make sense. Cousins to Justin Jefferson should almost be enough for 10 wins.
Sure. The Christian Darrisaw move looks like it's working out. Like they've made a lot of good moves. Again, it just got stale. They didn't get enough good ones. So Rick Spielman's still doing some good things. Mike Zimmer still doing some good things. Kirk Cousins, really good things. Just together, it wasn't getting better, and it was just stuck. So it just got stale. Cause of death, like terminal staleness, whatever that is, like stagnation. Stagnation is the cause of death. They stagnated, their heart stopped, and they had to game over, body bag.
The two other firings to discuss: Denver Broncos and Vic Fangio.
What's your cause of death?
I was agreeing with you.
Stagnation. You can't take mine.
Is it cheating? I really think it's a lot of the same as the Bears. I always compare the Vikings to the 2010 or 11 49ers, where they had this really good defense, this unbelievable starting 11. And ironically, that 49ers team didn't even use – they only subbed like 2 players in the whole game. It was just a top-heavy defense. I thought the Vikings were top-heavy in 2017. And, yeah, Zimmer's done some pretty good stuff over the last couple of years, but they were elite back then, even though they got torched by Nick Foles. They were unable to get that back on track. So I would say it's a combination of roster, again, just fell off over the last couple of years. And whether that's Kirk Cousins' fault, money-wise or not, you had a quarterback that just can't drag a team to incredible success. So combination of the roster management and Kirk Cousins not being able to overcome things. Is that all right? Is that fair?
Sure.
The other 2 firings were the Denver Broncos and Jacksonville Jaguars. Urban Meyer's cause of death.
Well, that should be easy.
Urban Meyer.
Which particular Urban incident was the cause of death?
Let's list the top 15. Let's go to the Broncos.
It's got to be the grinding photo, right? Like it's just dead on arrival from that point on. There's no way back.
It wasn't kicking the kicker.
No, God, no. Although that was the straw that broke the camel's back.
That was legitimately the cause of death. A story from August.
That was actually the straw that broke the camel's back.
I think it was his heart problems. Definitely his heart problems.
Look, it's a health issue.
I think it was his inability to, go down 7-0 in a preseason game in week 2 that was the cause of death. His inability to just understand or handle the NFL. That was Urban Meyer's
start
cause
to
of
finish.
death.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, he just everything he did. Eventually, it reached the point where the straw broke the camel's back, and out he goes. But
someone should send him his leadership book.
Yeah, this was a building thing from basically day one. Like he lasted 20 days or something before he hired the racist strength coach and had to fire him before he took his own job. Like from that moment on, it was just building. Like thing after thing after thing. Put that one in the bad pile for Urban, and the pile was just getting higher and higher and higher. And then eventually tried to kick his own kicker, and it's like, all right, just get rid of it.
Everything. But don't forget the timeline. He kicked his own kicker before the lap dance, even though the story came out later.
Right. The fact that became public was what broke the camel's back, not the fact that he did it.
Lack of development from the number 1 overall pick. Lack of hope from the number 1 overall pick.
Till week 18.
Yeah. He's ready. The Sam Darnold. Finished strong. The Geno Smith.
Just need a final game.
Hope in the last week. If Geno Smith is Mr. Week 17, Trevor Lawrence can be Mr. Week 18. Yeah, that's his thing. Denver Broncos and Vic Fangio. The official cause of death per the Broncos, they had an ultimatum to make the playoffs. They did not. They finished at 7-10. But what went wrong here?
Hang on, who gave the ultimatum?
That was supposedly what Fangio was.
But issued by whom?
From the top.
What is the from?
Whether it was ownership or George Payton, I don't know.
Ownership's like getting out. Who are they giving an ultimatum?
I have no idea. But
they're like bouncing, unless they're trying to like prop up the stock price.
That's what the story is. But this is another one of those situations where they brought in a new GM and George Payton last year. Vic, anytime that you've got a coach that's already there, it feels like a lame duck season anyway. So it could just be, regime change.
I mean, to me, the cause of death is there's no quarterback there, and they never got one.
Yes.
Like, their cause of death is they never had a chance because the single most important position on the team was staffed by Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, and that's just not going to get it done. Teddy Bridgewater played probably, again, like kind of similar to Kirk Cousins, played, I would say, better than you could expect Teddy Bridgewater to have played, and it still wasn't enough. Like, that's their issue. And where that gets really interesting is from the outside, it's very difficult to know how much of that is on Vic Fangio, right? This is a defensive-minded head coach, but he probably had a say in personnel. Like, people have said that he was all on board their decision to draft Patrick Surtain. On the other hand, he's unlikely to come out afterwards and say, what kind of bullshit is this? I wanted the quarterback. You know what I mean? So who knows? But if the job of the GM is to acquire talent and you as a defensive-minded head coach has a really good defense for multiple years, but no quarterback, it feels very harsh to say, well, you didn't make the playoffs in a division with Kansas City and Justin Herbert and, so see ya. That feels like he's getting hosed.
Well, the ironic thing here, too, is that the defense just did not grade well this year. We're not nearly as effective this year as they had been. Particularly when we came into the season, they broke our narrative a little bit, right? This was supposed to be this really, really good roster with a Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback, where if you threw Aaron Rodgers into the mix, they'd be fine. But the defense was not nearly as good as they should have been. Now, look, they had ridiculous injuries. They were rolling like seventh-string linebackers out there and everything.
They also traded away Von Miller, who was their only pass rusher.
They traded away Von Miller. I get it, which was a good forward-looking move at that point in the season, right? There were other teams going for it when they weren't that good. They were a team that was looking to the future. That was fine. But it's not like this defense dominated. So the defense, Vic Fangio's thing, gets a little bit worse through the years. The offense did some nice things this year, but it definitely comes down to the quarterback, right?
Yeah.
Even if they had drafted Justin Fields rather than Patrick Surtain and had that hope, I don't know if that's enough to save Fangio's job, because Fields probably wouldn't have played well enough this year to say, oh, look, Fangio needs to be the guy that develops this guy.
I don't want to be too on the I stand with Vic Fangio side, because, look, he made some bad in-game decisions. Even at the last game, we're kicking a field goal to make it a one-score game versus a one-score game. Like, what are we even doing here? But I don't think it's fair to him to be like, well, effectively he never had a chance. Without a quarterback in this league, you have no shot, almost no matter how good everything else is. And as everything else might be good enough to be a Super Bowl team with an Aaron Rodgers, but it's not good enough to like overcome Drew Lock or Teddy Bridgewater as your quarterback. So if you're not going to give the guy a quarterback, how can you possibly expect him to make the postseason in this murderer's row of a division with two of the best quarterbacks in the NFL and Derek Carr, who's not far off that pace? What were the expectations to just come out at the end of it and be like, well, he didn't make the playoffs. All right, whose fault is that? It's probably not his.
But it's probably fair to also ask, just like people are asking about Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn's getting head coaching interviews, right? Cowboys defensive coordinator. Got himself back on track.
Friend of the show,
Dan Quinn. Even as our friend, is it fair to question if Dan Quinn
was a friend of the show
or Vic Fangio might just be better as defensive coordinators?
Look, I think Vic Fangio may well be better as a defensive coordinator. I think Mike Zimmer may well be better as a
Zimmer too. I mean,
all of these guys
coveted, by the way.
On the other hand, I think you're screwing the guy if throughout his head coaching tenure, the dude responsible for acquiring personnel never gave him a quarterback.
Oh, I agree.
Like, what chance does he have?
That's the cause of death.
Yes.
If they have better And Bridgewater played fine. I mean, he played well, but he got hurt and all that stuff. Bridgewater played pretty well this year. But then you have a game like against Kansas City where the defense did play well on Sunday Night Football and the offense couldn't do a thing. There was just a disconnect. They were never dangerous because of the quarterback situation. That is the cause of death.
Yeah.
That is it.
And I don't think that's on Vic Fangio, unless the only way I think you can place the blame on him is if he was part of the decision-making process at draft time and the discussion went something like this, right? Okay, Vic, we can take a cornerback, a number 8, or we can grab a guy like Justin Fields and he's your quarterback going forward. And maybe even that buys you an extra year, but that's your option, right? Do you want the quarterback or the cornerback? And it was Vic going, oh, give me the DB. I'm a defensive guy. I want defense. Let's go. If that was how it went down, fine. The dude made the wrong call and he gets to live with the decision. But if that was a decision made like outside of his control and he just endorsed it because that's what you do as a good team player, as a company man, yeah, I was all on board with Patrick Surtain. He's a great player. I don't want a quarterback. Then, like, if that's how it went down, then the guy literally never had a chance to succeed, and he's carrying the can for it.
Yeah. So, I mean, either way, no matter how you get there, it's the quarterback situation, whether it's Vic's fault or not.
Yes.
Or the front offices. Any other? We covered the Jags. They're covered.
Yes.
It was Urban. Any other firings?
Urban's
the other
fault.
Open job is the Raiders. So we already know what
the cause of death is pretty obvious there.
We already know. It was an
emails.
email form.
Leaked emails.
For John Gruden. So, yeah, we'll have plenty more as coaching candidates and GM candidates get hired. I hate this time of the season when it's like, man, like Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter are just copying and pasting texts from agents.
Why is the water carrying getting more intense? Like, it used to be where they just copied and pasted the text anyway, but the text didn't editorialize, right? It was just like, dude tore his ACL, confirmed, out for 6 to 9 months. Now it's like, doctors expect that when he comes back, he'll actually run a 4.1 and be able to see through things and fly. Like, what? Just give the information. Like, why
ridiculous.
are we? And it's getting worse. Like, it's almost like the agents have like a pool. Let's see what's the most ridiculous thing you can get Rappaport and Schefter to just put out there. Like, just put it in the text and see if they'll send it.
I just think it's because the agent world is so cutthroat that they would.
But those guys are journalists. Like, it's on you as journalistic integrity to like cut that part of the text.
Yeah, but if you do, then the other guy gets it next time.
The 3 seconds it takes you to cut out the last 8 words of the text.
No, I'm not saying it's a time issue. I'm saying it's a.
You're saying if you cut out the guy's bullshit, he won't send you the text anymore?
Appeal to the agent.
God, that's
yes,
weird.
I don't think it's a time thing, Sam. I'm saying they're copying and pasting a text that the agent has editorialized, and they're keeping the editorial in there to keep the agents happy. Yes. So that they get the next scoop, not because it's quicker.
That's obnoxious.
Yeah, it is, because you don't need to tell me that this bad special teams player is a special teams ace, or that this guy's been working really hard and whatever.
Yeah, it's bad. It's
bad.
getting worse. It's like the whole world is going this way, right? It isn't just Schefter and Rappaport, but like soccer coverage is. It used to be you got to be impartial, right? It doesn't matter who you used to play for. The teams out there are just 2 generic teams, and you're just analysts. You're a pundit. You are impartial. You have no rooting interest. Just go with it. Now, they like throw out all the people that used to play for that game, and they're like recording them celebrating at halftime and stuff, right? Like they're leaning in to the biases because they think that like the passion that creates is better television. So they're actually leaning into all of the anti-journalistic standards, like all the things you're supposed to do. To hell with that. Like celebrating the press box. Who cares? Let's go with it.
I don't like it.
I don't hate it, but that's the way the world is.
We're not journalists at all, but we're certainly unbiased analysts.
We're certainly more impartial than that.
Presented as such.
Can I read you an email now?
Yeah.
This one in, God damn it, I should have checked this name. Drake Frere, I'm going to go with. Frare. Frere. Could be anything. But
Drake Ramore.
Drake Ramore.
Would Austin or Renner know that reference?
No, not a chance. All right. The Red Rock Amphitheater is a 10,000 capacity open amphitheater built into the Red Rocks just outside Denver, Colorado. It's become quite famous over time as the natural beauty of the rock formations and the view of the Denver skyline make it an extremely unique, can't do that, can't modify unique, it's bad.
No, you can't.
Renner would hate that. Venue for live events. This venue was so incredible that after Pollster magazine awarded it as best small outdoor venue for the 11th time in 1999, they simply changed the name of the award to the Red Rocks Award and decided that the Red Rock Amphitheater wasn't allowed to be considered anymore. It was just too good of a venue. Aaron Donald is clearly the Defensive Player of the Year for 2021, as he was in 2020 and 19, and so on and so forth. Because it's no fun to just pick the same guy over and over, even if he deserves the award, the simple solution to this seems to be to rename Defensive Player of the Year to the Aaron Donald Award and disqualify him from any future consideration. This would allow for other new players to win the award while also not slighting a deserving Donald. In addition, Steelers fans would stop flooding the mentions with every PFF-related account on Twitter with Watt-related comments. Thanks for reading, and hope to hear a punter or special teams heavy episode one of these days.
We've had a couple of those requests. It could all be from...
It's probably the same guy, yeah.
From Drake.
I like that as an idea, though. Like,
that would save us a lot of...
Rather than allow voter fatigue to essentially warp the award and stop giving it to Donald, who deserves it, let's just rename it in his honor and assume that every year he deserves it, and then be able to give it to other people.
We should... Yeah, so then we can give TJ Watt the Aaron Donald Defensive Player of the Year award.
That's what I'm saying.
Now Steelers fans can be happy.
I think there is a genuine argument that Aaron Donald should have won 5 straight Defensive Player of the Years and be on the way to his 6th.
So you mentioned this on either the Daily or we were talking about it, about how that changes perception, right? So you go into those Hall of Fame meetings, and in the Hall of Fame meeting, somebody's like, well, this guy was first-team All-Pro this many times. And it's like, you guys were the ones, you are the data point that you're now using as a data point. You created the data point. I mean, we do this too, PFF. Look, our grading creates a data point that we then use.
There's already a debate about, like, who's better. You know, Lawrence Taylor, Aaron Donald, Reggie White. Like, he's in that kind of stratosphere already. But if you gave, and this could well be the case for Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White as well, by the way. Like, for all I know, those guys should have won 6 straight Defensive Player of the Year.
I bet Reggie would have been Donald, like, in our grading.
The point is, But if Donald was working on 6 straight, he would already be declared, and it wouldn't be an argument. It would be settled. He is the greatest to ever do it. Like, he is the best player, the best defensive player the game has ever seen. I don't don't come at me with Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White and these losers. I don't see them having 6 straight Defensive Player of the Year. Like, it would be done.
Yeah.
But because he isn't, he's working on 3, and it's like, yeah, I mean, that's great, but, you know, Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White. Like, it completely changes the whole perception on the guy without him changing at all, just by recognizing him as the better player in each season where he didn't get given the award, which he probably was.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be
So I like this idea. Let's do that.
We can just do that. PFF Awards, I believe, are going to be going live tonight, announcing all of them here on YouTube. And I don't know if people saw, but we're doing a little trivia matchup.
Yes.
With our tailgate friends here.
Trivia battle to the death.
So here's what we need. Austin from Tailgate tweeted out, like, hey, send us some trivia questions.
We did as well.
Yeah, we did too, but we did it wrong. Like, we need people to email us the questions so that they can't see them. Because we're going to ask questions to them.
That bridge has already been crossed.
Email us anyway if you have great trivia questions that we can ask them. Football or non-football related. And how much non-football would you want to hear about this? Because Dr. Drake Ramore would be a great trivia question for the youngins over there. I think Renner might catch that, but Austin hasn't watched many TV shows or movies through the years, and I feel like we can stump him on some
Let's
stuff.
put our cards on the table, right? We are doing this trivia. There's a lot of people listen to our podcast. There's a lot of people that listen to Tailgate and watch Tailgate on YouTube, and one of the constant themes is, the personalities. People like us for some known reason.
No idea why.
I don't like us, let alone other people.
Yep. Don't like each other. Don't like us.
For some reason, people like us, and people like Austin and Renner. So we're like, well, let's lean into that, right? Let's play up the idea of personalities and humanizing them, and let's take the podcasts and put them in a slightly different environment and see if people like that as well. So we're going to do trivia, our podcast versus their podcast. But to me, you get way more interesting and entertaining stuff asking any kind of trivia, not just like random obscure football data points or PFF data points, but like Austin was born like 7 minutes ago, so let's ask him about a bunch of movies that were in the 1980s that he's not seen, right? Because like God knows Austin hasn't seen things like The Godfather or
But is that just completely
Goodfellas.
Unfair?
No, because they could do it to us as well. That's what I'm saying. Like we give Austin questions about movies he's never seen because they existed like in the 1990s where he doesn't, and they give us questions about
Like famous TikTokers or something.
Yeah, or like, Taylor Swift or whatever.
Sure.
So I think that's way funnier than like name the player that finished at the top of the Defensive Player of the Year standings in 1998.
But that might be entertaining too. We'll see.
Right. But anyway, my point is I'm laying my cards on the table. I think it's better to have more non-football stuff.
Yeah.
So if you do as well and you're listening, hashtag let us know, right? Either email us in nflpodcast@pff.com.
Do a poll.
Or tweet
from
it.
the main account.
Tweet it at PFF NFL Pod or at PFF_Sam or Steve. Let us know if you want to hear like random obscure trivia things and give us questions, or if you do want the straight-laced, boring-ass football discussion that I want no part of.
You're not twisting it at all.
No, I'm not even trying. I'm not even hiding it. I want you, as our listeners, to help me warp this discussion in my direction.
Tell the people you want all non-football.
That's what I'm saying.
Renner's idea was actually, I think, the hybrid.
Not only do I want non-football questions, I want you to tell us that you want non-football questions. I want you to amplify my objection to the way this is headed at the moment.
Could you also please... I liked Renner's idea here, which is a bit of a hybrid where maybe you could come up with your own category. So he was like, oh, Steve's can be like 80s wrestling. So I at least know
like
where my
special
category
subject,
is.
mastermind.
Right. This is my specialty, and then they can somehow pull questions out that. What would your specialty be?
Josh,
Irish rugby?
No. See, I have
That'd be mine,
I have
really.
a very bad memory for things that I haven't seen like a million times, right? So it needs to be something that I've seen a million times. Josh Norris asked me on his podcast, and same thing. It was like, what is your specialist subject? And I said, again, I'm pretty bad at this stuff when it's like, the questions that are asked to you with zero time to think about it. It's just like, So he asked me what my specialist subject was, and I said the Naked Gun movies, right? Because I'm pretty sure I know them quite well.
Yeah.
And he had never seen any of them. So he had to watch the Naked Gun movies to be able to ask me questions about them. And A, it was hilarious because he hated them. And then B, I actually did know quite a lot about them.
That's dedication. That's hours of dedication just to have you on his podcast?
Yeah. I'd stick with that.
Good
I think
for
I would
Josh.
stick with the Naked Gun movies.
I would say 80s, 90s wrestling.
See, I think that's too broad, though. Like
Wade
Mastermind,
Boggs' 1980 batting averages.
Mastermind has a similar problem, right? Where
Saved
if
by
you
the
go-
Bell trivia.
If you go too broad, they can pull any old thing out of it and you're just screwed. You need something like really laser focused.
Saved by the Bell. I may have lost a lot of my Saved by the Bell knowledge, but
I'd be impressed if you still had that now.
I've got some.
I mean, not in a good way, but like.
I once played Saved by the Bell trivia with Mr. Belding.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
The 2009 Fresno Grizzlies. We had a special
Grizzlies.
night, Mad Tight 90s night, and
What?
we called it Mad Tight 90s night.
Back
so we
when
wore
like
some
tight was
90s
afraid-
throwback jerseys.
Was this hang
Mr.
on.
Belding was our special guest at this particular night. There's a picture of me and Mr. Belding in the locker room back
The
then.
tight spelled tight in this scenario?
Just regular.
Regular tight. So
Not
it wasn't like back when tight was a way of saying like a slang term for cool.
It's not like a defensive front.
TITE.
Yeah, it's not the defensive front tight.
Okay.
It's just mad tight. Oh, it's mad tight 90s. Mad tight 90s night. Mr. Belding was our special guest. I'm a reliever, so I don't have to be out in the bullpen until the third, fourth, fifth inning. So I'm just hanging out in the
Does that happen
dugout.
during a game?
Well, he did a lot of pregame festivities, but he would be like in between innings doing stuff with the crowd or whatever. So he's hanging out in our dugout, and we're doing. He stumped me. I forget what the question was, but he stumped me in Saved by the Bell trivia. I thought but he was in it. He was into playing.
He must have hated that night. Must have been like the worst night of his life.
Him?
Yeah.
That's like his life. He probably made $5,000 to like show up and be Mr. Belding.
Right, but like the Rolling Stones go out there and no one wants to hear anything that like I want your 7 most famous songs played sequentially for the millionth time you've done that this year. Those guys must want to kill themselves every time they're doing a show. Mr. Bell, you're telling me that guy, the one thing he wants to do of an evening is do Saved by the Bell trivia.
He was kind of into it. He was into his whole role, his gimmick. He didn't get too many other shots at other roles after Mr. Belding.
That's what I'm saying.
He's Mr. Belding.
Right. So that guy
in
for the rest of his life.
In the new class, like he's Mr. Belding. That's what he is. He owned it.
He wasn't there in the college one, though, right? Whatever that one was called.
He didn't do the college years.
What that was called.
The
college years?
Golick. One of the Golicks was there. Bob Golick was in it.
Huh.
The college years.
Okay.
There's a trivia question for you. Which Golick?
You could have used that one.
Which Golick was in Saved by the Bell college years? All right.
Not anymore. It's out there.
Show's over. By the way, tomorrow I mentioned we put draft season in the title. We didn't get to our draft season stuff. We'll touch on draft season a little bit tomorrow. It's draft season, and we'll kick things off tomorrow. But tomorrow we will preview all of the wild card games. We got 6 of them. That'll take 3 to 4 hours, and then we'll get into some draft stuff for all the non-playoff teams as well.
Perfect.
Sound good? Don't forget, promo code NFLPOD. You get 25% off right now, PFF.com. Every subscription, 25% off using just our promo code NFLPOD. So email Sam, NFLpodcast@PFF.com.
Tell us
No, it's podcast. What is it again?
NFL Podcast, singular.
At PFF.com.
PFF.com.
I'm confusing that now with the Twitter account.
Yeah.
So email Sam and tell him how much you love non-football questions for trivia, as well as adding trivia questions for us for this show that you'll be seeing soon. Anyway, thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow on our Wildcard Weekend preview.
Super Wildcard Weekend.
Super Wildcard.